Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast, Mailbag Edition. A little late, we warned you. It's out now, though. I'm at Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack on the show. We've got a lot to dive into. Looking at the questions, it's kind of all over the place. And that's what this season of this time of the year is. We've got basketball tournament discussion. We've got some NFL discussion. And we're also going to dive into some football. And there's a lot to get to. So let's just go right into it. I don't know the order, but Erik, you are the person in charge of that. So go ahead.
Matt, the order's right here. I've got it onto the side. You know the order.
I'm just trying to pretend.
Okay, never mind. Matt doesn't know the order. He can't see it, apparently. First question here. And we're going to go to Jared because he's been handling our NFL Combine coverage. By the way, NFL Combine wraps up today, we should say, Monday, March 6th. So I don't even know, Matt or Jared. Before I get to the question, is anyone still yet to perform from an Oregon perspective, or have all of the athletes already gone?
Combine wrapped up yesterday.
Why did it say March 6th when I Googled it a moment ago?
I'm not sure. Maybe there's still interviews to do for teams and players, but
it does say March 6th on the old Googles, but I will trust
all the
expertise.
Workouts are done today.
So workouts are done?
Or done yesterday, excuse me.
So this question is even maybe more finality in terms of answering it from @Nash_Duccaneer. Which former Oregon players from the NFL Combine do you see getting drafted and where? And then a second component, do you think Christian Gonzalez is now a lock to go top 10? Gonzalez, of course, had a very strong combine showing in individual drills, ran 4.38, I think, in the 40, vertical over 40 inches, kind of everything you wanted from him while being measured in about 6'2", 200 pounds. So maybe let's start with that part, Jared, and then get to the second.
Sure.
You know, I think the thing that's kind of cool with Oregon here, obviously, you'd like to see more depth in these drafts, but this could be 4 straight years with a top 10 pick. Not a lot of schools can say that. Of course, some schools can say that they get 4 guys every top 10, it seems like. But from an Oregon perspective, what do you think, Jared? I think the odds seem pretty good right now that Gonzalez has taken top 10, kind of with the buzz of the combine wearing off here.
Yeah, certainly. I think Gonzalez was probably a lock to go top 10 before the combine. He was the 1 or 2 cornerback in everybody's mock draft. You just have to ask, depending on who's making the mock draft. It's either him or Devon Witherspoon out of Illinois or Joey Porter Jr. out of Penn State. But Gonzalez did really well at his combine. I think that's exactly what people expected. He was listed on Bruce Feldman's top 60 or 80 freaks 2 years ago. He still is a physical freak. He checked in at 6'1", 197 pounds, so just under what he was listed at Oregon. Decent arm length at 32 inches total, but like Erik said, a 4.38 40, 1.54 second 10-yard split, which is pretty important for his position group as a cornerback. You want a quick change ability, which is pretty good at 1.45. And then a good test in just his overall explosive athleticism was his broad jump at 11 feet 1 inches, and then his vertical jump at 41.5 inches. So I think Gonzalez performed just as well as I think everybody expected him to. I think a top 10 pick could certainly be on the horizon for him as long as he interviews well. There's no reason to think that he wouldn't. He's been a good football mind the entire time at Oregon. Every time we interview him, although he's not much of a talker, he does have a very good understanding of what's going on in the football field and can diagnose plays really well. In terms of everybody else, other than Noah Sewell, I don't know if someone's going to get drafted. Probably. But it's not going to be till day 3. And Sewell is probably going to be a day 2 guy just because of his defensive upside and his athleticism at his height and weight. But I could see him slip into day 3 as well, just because he performed fine, but he didn't perform great. He and DJ Johnson performed on the very first night as a part of the linebacker group. Obviously, Noah at inside and DJ Johnson at outside linebacker. I thought DJ had a better combine than Noah Sewell did. Obviously, DJ Johnson is at a disadvantage being his age. I think he's 23 or 24. Sewell is obviously a younger guy. He's coming out after his junior year. But, Sewell, 4.6, 4.40, 1.57, 10-yard split, which is pretty good. But 9'7" broad jump, a 33-inch vertical jump. not necessarily explosive athlete numbers, which I think was one of his biggest knocks coming out of college, even coming into college, was can he maintain his explosive athleticism at his size and his weight? He did cut. He was 246 pounds at the combine, which is down from his 153 pounds on the Oregon roster. And then DJ Johnson had a great combine, 4.49 40-yard dash for a guy who's 6'4", 260 pounds. But, because of his age, I'm sure somebody will pick him up, probably as an undrafted free agent. But I'm not sure that he'll be picked at all. I'm sure one of the offensive linemen will be picked between Forsyth, Malasala Amoave-Lalu, and TJ Bass. But, I'm not 100% sure that any of them are going to be picked. I think that they're late round draft picks. I think someone like Adrian Clem might take a guy in the 6th or 7th round, but there's no guarantee. I mean, they're not on any mock drafts. They're going to be similar to what the offensive line class was after 2019 with Jake Hansen, Shane Lemieux, and Calvin Throckmorton, where those guys do get picked up eventually, and sure, they start playing in the NFL, but it won't be an immediate impact like somebody like a Christian Gonzalez was or a Penei Sewell was.
The last 3 drafts, 2 corners in each draft have seen two cornerbacks go in the top 10. So 6 cornerbacks have been drafted in the top 10 over the last 3 years. So basically you're asking yourself, is Christian Gonzalez a top 2 corner? It's not that simple, but kind of is. I think he probably is in that discussion. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes in the top 10, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he slides to 13 or 14. Like, what happens if some teams make some trades and realize we can get Gonzo at 16 and get a 3rd round draft pick or something?
Gonzo's going to be gone by then. That's the thing.
Well, I mean, my point is, like, crazy stuff happens and he may slip to 11. What's the difference between 10 and 11? Like, I think he's going to go top 10. I would think he is, but I wouldn't be surprised if he slips 2 or 3 spots just because some team says, hey, these 3 teams don't need a cornerback. We can, instead of drafting Gonzo at 7, we can get him at 11 or 12.
Are we surprised by Sewell's marks, by the way? I find them to be kind of all what I expected. And I bring that up because I've seen people suggest that it was a huge disappointment that he didn't run like 4.5, but did we think he was going to run 4.5? He ran 4.64, which is fine, which is okay for an inside linebacker. I think I saw, again, it's on Twitter, so I haven't verified it, and maybe I should before even saying it, but that 4.64 is in like the 70th percentile of current NFL starting inside linebackers, and I don't even know if we think he's a starting inside linebacker, but so basically what you're saying is, like, even though that's not a great time, that's a time that the majority of NFL players can at least run, right, that position group. So I don't know. I continue to think like he didn't have a great final season, but I feel like we're seeing people go from, we expected a couple of years ago coming off of 2020, off of 2021, that he'd be a first-round talent. So now the fact that he's clearly not a first-round talent, that he's going to be like undrafted, which doesn't feel like jives with what I've seen or what I've read. So, like, Jared, like, did you think 4.64? Like, and I also think we also get into this thing where we come off the combine and a guy runs one time and it's slower than we think, and that we are emotionally invested because we thought he'd run a certain time. Like, and do you think what he did like cost him a ton of draft equity, or is this sort of like, I just never saw him as somebody who I thought would do particularly well at a thing like this, like a combine, like athletically, he's never going to stack up with guys who are running, sub 4.5 at 235 pounds when he's closer to 250.
Yeah, I mean, his draft combine did not cost him draft stock. His season this past year cost him draft stock. That was the problem.
Right.
It was a very underwhelming season for Noah. And he said at the combine to James Creppier, the Oregonian who was there covering it, that, at one point he was injured. And that makes a lot of sense as to why he, struggled to play with the same tenacity and same statistical evaluation that he has at years past at Oregon. That's what knocked him down, because he came into the year back in September and August in mock drafts before the season, which are always fun to look at if anybody has just some spare time to go look at mock drafts before college football seasons even start. But he was a projected first-round pick, and I'm saying like top 28. Like, he was not just, at the very tail end of a mock. He was in there. and this is from ESPN, this is from CBS, these are from reputable mock draft analysts and guys who have industry connections. There were a few things to not like about Sewell after his freshman and sophomore year. He was a good player. He had good size, traditional old school middle linebacker, 6'2", 250 pounds, moved well, tackled well. His play this past year really, took a hit to his draft stock. And, he's going to be drafted. Just depends where. I think like second, third round is probably a more realistic route. Like Gonzalez, he's not much of a talker when it comes to media, but he's very understanding of football. He has a great football IQ. And so teams are really going to appreciate that. But he's not that first round talent that I think a lot of people expected him to be. That's why he was rated a 5-star coming out of high school, because that's what evaluators are looking at in terms of what a star prospect is. And with his performance at the combine, I mean, it was probably a little underwhelming. You would have liked to have seen him reach into 5 or 4 5s for a 40 time. But I mean, that's just how it's going to be. It's just the 40 times nowadays are absolutely absurd. And when you aren't running a good 40 time, it's looked at as a disaster. And I don't think Sewell's combine performance was a disaster. It was probably about what you'd expect. You would have liked a little bit better in the 40, but that's what you would expect for a guy who's 6'2", 246 pounds running a 40-yard dash.
And he ran 4.75 in high school, by the way. So you just knew he was never like a 4.4, 4.5 guy. So when he ran 4.64, I just saw a lot of Oregon fans reacting like the world was coming to an end when he ran 4.64. I'm kind of like, sure, as Jared said, like
he's a big kid.
You'd love to see him run 4.55, but I just don't think anybody who watched him for 3 years thought he would. So the fact that people get super disappointed by that outcome and think he cost himself money. I agree with Jared. I think he cost himself money in the months of September through December, not through the months of I guess since then. To your point about looking at old mock drafts, my favorite one is the Tyler Shuck being the number 1 overall draft pick that was circulating for like 2 cycles.
This draft.
In this upcoming draft. Yeah, a couple years ago, he was the projected number 1 pick for a couple of years on one outlet, which I always found comical. So do we have any more draft
football? I don't think Saleh tested really well for a big guy. He's probably the best offensive line prospect despite his age. And then shout out to DJ Johnson running a 4.49 40. Absolutely absurd.
So he's not in mocks. Like, we don't think he's going anywhere.
There are very few people who will do a 6 to 7 round mock draft, and I respect that because it just sounds hellacious. But I think Saleh, you could see him in that 5 to 7 round. He's big enough, he's talented enough, he's still young enough, and he's proven enough where a team like the Patriots with Adrian Clem, who literally has firsthand experience, might try to pick him up. Just because he's good. He's a plug and play guy. Like I said earlier, he's like the 2019 offensive line with Lemieux and Throckmorton and Jake Hansen. Like, those guys are experienced. You can kind of plug them in and hopefully get a couple plays in if somebody has an injury type of deal.
And I guess just reacting to that, and then we'll move on to the second question here. That sort of surprises me a little bit, considering from an on-field production perspective at Oregon, the other 2 players who were at the combine, Forsythe and Bath, were both multiple-time all-conference players, and I think Big Saleh was an honorable mention. So from an on-field perspective, and I think even looking back at PFF grades, you would suggest, hey, these other 2 guys are better, but you think based on the combine, he now has the best chance of being drafted?
I think they all have a similar chance. I just think that Saleh's measurements favor him a little bit more. Like Bass's measurements, he has to move to guard at the NFL.
Well, yeah.
Must.
That's what he wanted to do from the beginning since he's been here at Oregon.
Right. Yeah, 100%. And he's going to have to do it in the NFL because his measurements were not that of an offensive tackle, while Saleh's were. Alex Forsythe actually measured very well. He measured in at 6'4" too. So that's a big thing for him. I think, so I honestly, just from what Saleh did and his 40 time and his 3-cone drill and all that good stuff that I obsess over and nobody else does, I think Saleh does have the higher potential of being drafted earlier. And then Forsythe is a center. You don't necessarily need to draft centers too often.
Yeah, but if you're a good center, you separate yourself and you go typically in drafts. I'm not saying it's foresight, but typically in drafts, there's like one or two centers that separate and are like second or third round picks, and then no one gets taken to like the seventh. So I don't know if Alex is that guy, and he probably isn't, considering I think he got hurt in the middle of the combine too, so he wasn't able to run. Which is,
he didn't participate in any of the drills.
Disappointing. All right. Question 2. I think this is a new question asker, so thank you for listening to the show and for submitting one from @duck2081, and then the lowercase letter a, which is interesting. I wonder what that means. 2081 letter A. Any chance the new OC will try to protect Bo Nix from injury? I believe Justin Herbert was limited from running in 2019 until the Rose Bowl. Good memory on 2019. That's right. After Herbert got injured under Willie Taggart's watch in 2017, there was basically a 2-year we're not going to run Justin Herbert going on, and that carried throughout. To the question about Bo, I think it's an interesting question to pose, given the similarities where we've now had both of Oregon's. I would say, well, I'm not even going to say that. We've had two. These are the best 2 quarterbacks Oregon's had in a long time, right? Like, without question, the quarterbacks in between were not up to these players' caliber. The quarterbacks preceding Herbert, I guess Vernon, you would say, from a production standpoint, was on par, but from a talent perspective, I don't think anyone thinks he was as good. So, like, you're talking about the 2 best quarterbacks I think Oregon has had since Mariota, and both of them had injuries that cost them, in Herbert's case, games. In Nix's case, obviously, being at 100% and been able to perform at the end of the season. So I see the similarities there. I think there is a chance that they'll try to limit that, but I also say you look at the history of what Bo Nix has put on film. Very capable as a runner. You saw Oregon's offense really take a step back following that. Obviously, the offense would take a much bigger step back if another quarterback were thrust into the game, so you understand why you'd want to be protective. But I also look at what Will Stein's history is, and again, I'm not saying he can't be creative and they can't come up with a Bo will never carry the football strategy, but Will Stein, also a guy who likes to run his quarterback. At least that's what we see historically at UTSA. I know it's not a huge sample size, but there's certainly a desire to have mobile quarterbacks, and Bo's really mobile. So I would imagine that they'll, of course, try to limit the hits he takes, but I don't think you can remove that entire component, because I just think that really hurts this offense. And we saw firsthand the back quarter of the season there where Bo didn't run the football in any organized situations really at all, until a couple of late game scenarios where they wanted to trick a defense, and you could tell that he wasn't healthy in doing that. I just thought that you saw the offense take a step back. So I'm sure they'll do everything they can to protect Bo. I don't think they're just going to completely eliminate quarterback runs from the discussion.
This answer can be simply no, because Dan Lanning's been asked about it multiple times, and he says we play to win the game. So they're gonna use what they like, Bo's competitiveness and his toughness, and they're gonna use it. So Will Stein. I mean, I don't think will, because like you said, he's ran his quarterbacks at his previous stop. But even if he wanted to, the man in charge of the entire program doesn't have that philosophy. So
yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. I also don't think that there were a lot of designed Bo Nix runs last year. Not to say that they didn't do it, because they did, but
you mean
the percentage of it.
RPOs in general is just an opportunity for it to be designed run, though. Like, that's part of that's
right.
built in.
Yeah, but how often? I just didn't think he was taking it himself that often. Like, I don't think that the offense was designed a lot around Bo Nix taking the ball and keeping it and running it himself. I know that he had the option to do so, but it's kind of like the Anthony Brown idea of, like, is this really an RPO? Is it really an option?
You don't think they're running a lot of RPOs last year?
No, Eric, I do. I'm just saying, like, I don't think that of Bo Nix's runs last season, I don't think a lot of them were designed. I think a lot of them were scrambles and opportunities for him to run the ball down the field, which will 100% happen this next season. Whether or not Will Stein elects to have a lot more actual runs for Nix, we'll see. I mean, that's the whole thing about Will Stein, is that there's a lot of question marks revolving around what he's going to do with the offense, and we're just going to find out eventually. I think that Bo Nix will be a running part of this offense, just because they absolutely need it. To Eric's point earlier, when he went down with an injury and couldn't run, the offense took a hit. And you look at how Oregon had Justin Herbert and not allowing him to run. Herbert's a better passer than Bo Nix is by a long shot. And again, no disrespect to Bo Nix, but Justin Herbert is just a better passer. And so that they were able to withstand his inability or the coach's decision to not allow him to run because he's just a better passer. But Oregon needs Bo Nix to be mobile, to at least scramble, to maybe take an RPO once or twice a game, just to show that he can do it like he did against Utah and tried to do against Washington. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see where they go with his offensive attack, but I don't. They're not going to limit him in running, like Matt said. Dan's not going to allow that to happen.
I think you answered your question though, or you answered the question. Bo Nix, when he got hurt against Utah, the offense took a huge hit. I think the RPOs were there quite often. We just didn't see him hand it off because he didn't need to, because teams were so respectful of his outside game. And then how many times did we see Bo Nix do a QB sneak? Well, I know it's only 1 or 2 yards, but you're still asking your quarterback to basically go through the most violent part of the field for 1 or 2 yards. 20 times? I think that's on the low end, and that's a quarter of his carries. So I absolutely think they call it designed runs. It just happened to be that he made the right read most of the time. He was 4th in the conference in rushing attempts for quarterbacks, by the way.
Yeah, and I guess I'm trying to think of what I want to address first. I actually do think to the Herbert part in 18 and 19, I think it's funny in retrospect. There's a lot of criticism about Mario being unable to get the most out of Herbert, and I think some of that's legitimate. But I actually think a part of why that 19-18 offense wasn't particularly explosive, like you go back and look at the numbers, they had some good games, but they were Herbert's career statistically isn't probably what a lot of people thought it could have been. And I think a component of that was the inability to run the football from an RPO perspective. There was no threat to run at all up until the end of the season. And then look at the success they had in the Rose Bowl when they did unleash that, and obviously Nix is a better run. If you just want to break down the two's talents, yeah, Nix is a better runner than Herbert, and Herbert's a better passer than Nix. No one's arguing that. But I think what held back that 2019 offense at times, and of course you don't want to say that they had a disappointing season because they won a Rose Bowl, they won the conference. A lot of high watermarks were hit, but they didn't run the quarterback really at all until the very end of the season. And when they did, they had a lot of success doing so. And so you could almost make that a cautionary tale of why, if you're Dan Lanning, you want to be very careful with how you approach this. And Dan, as Matt said, has already come out and said, I've asked the question a couple of times about running quarterbacks. I think I asked it early on in the season because Nix wasn't sliding. And Dan was saying, I'm in support of it until it's not a productive part of the offense. And he says, I might look silly later for saying this if he gets hurt, but we want to run the quarterback because we want to be competitive. And that's Nix's mindset. So I know we've kind of talked our way around this whole thing. I think we're all in agreement of I don't anticipate this offense being limiting in terms of what Nix is asked to do, because I know he's competitive. I know the coaching staff is competitive and they want to do what they can to win football games. But it will be interesting to see how and what ways maybe they add extra precautions to protect Bo, or if that's something that is an offseason talking point, or if they go, hey, that was part of the game of football and it was a game on the line. We called the play. He made a move and took a hit, and that's just part of the game. Mm-hmm. You aren't going to take that away, because if you do, you remove a huge component of the offense. So I think that part will be interesting to track, but I don't anticipate much changes.
Frank Harris had 129 carries in 2022 as a quarterback for UTSA. That would have been first in the conference in the Pac-12. Mm-hmm. We don't know, like Jared said, we don't know how many of those are designed runs or him scrambling, but he had 129 attempts.
He didn't have 100, and he definitely didn't have 129 scrambles. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, definitely not. No.
All right, let's take a quick break. We'll wrap up the second half of the show on the mailbag after that. Welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. 2 questions in, a couple more to go.
All right, third question. I think this is another first-time question asker, so thanks for asking. I believe it's at Keller, but they use the numeral 3 in place of the E's, so it's K3LL3R. Who, in your opinion, will win Freshman of the Year on offense and on defense? in football for Oregon, hashtag Autzen Audibles. So we're not talking Pac-12 freshman of the year, clearly here. We're talking limited to just Oregon football players in 2023. Who's the top offensive freshman? Who's the top defensive freshman? If we are using 2022 as any sort of context of what a freshman usage will look like, it doesn't seem like we're expecting any of these freshmen to have breakout seasons necessarily, because what we saw, I think we talked about this before, small sample size. One thing that'll be interesting in 2023 is how does Dan Lanning choose to utilize his true freshman? Because again, in 2022, I've been doing the redshirt review series up on 24/7 recently, and like almost everybody from that class redshirted. So it's a lot of reviews to go through because Dan didn't really utilize his freshman the way maybe Mario had. And obviously so much of this is situational, but there just wasn't a ton of usage. So I'll be curious in 2023 with, again, a lot of highly rated players, how many of them see the field, what roles they see them in. Do you want to do offense first, defense second, and just kind of go through? Does that work?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, why not?
I'm going to go Kenyon Sadiq just because I think that's the clearest route to immediate playing time, given that there are three. And then we've got, again, as Matt brought up on our last podcast, we've now gone 26 minutes without Jared begging the coaching staff for adding a tight end. You'll probably do so in a moment here. But the fact that Kenyon Sadiq steps onto the field here, or the practice turfs, we should say, as a true freshman, and is like the de facto number 3 tight end. Not that that's a problem at all necessarily. It's not ideal, but what it certainly does is provide him the pathway to a lot of playing time and potentially being the biggest difference maker in year one as a true freshman on offense. So that's the pick I would make. There are several other guys you could choose, I think, but to me, he makes the most sense, and not because I think he's the most talented player. By golly, do I think he's one of them, but because he's got the best kind of route to the field.
Yeah, I think there's only two options for this. I think it's either Kenyon Sadiq or Jurian Dickey. I think Dante Dowdell is another guy that you could list, but he's behind Bucky Irving, Noah Whittington, and Jordan James from last season. I'll just be different, and I'll pick Jurian Dickey as the guy. I will say Kenyon Sadiq's a very good pick because of the lack of tight end depth, so Dan, get on that. You've got an injury-prone tight end in front of him, Patrick Herbert, and then that's it. And then you have Terrence Ferguson. So very clear route there for Kenyon Sadiq to get into playing time. I'm going with Jurian Dickey because other than Trayshawn Holden, we are not aware of who the other Z receivers are on the roster, and we'll find out here in a couple of weeks as spring ball begins. Dickey, 5-star wide receiver recruit, really talented, good frame already. It just depends, what time he enrolls into camp. If he's a guy who enrolls during the summer, if he's a guy who enrolls during the spring term, I guess summer/fall, and then gets the understanding of the playbook and then comes in and competes on a day-to-day basis and then wins some type of backup job. It could be very similar to what we saw with Troy Franklin and his freshman season, where slated as a starter to begin the season gets hurt. Dickey could work himself into some competition with Trayshawn Holden, just depending on how they go at it. But I think that he's got a great chance to get onto the field as an offensive freshman. I do like Eric's pick in Dickey more, though. In Sadiq more, though.
Yeah, I would have picked Kenyon Sadiq as well. And so if I'm going to go like a wild card option, I'd go Ashton Cozart. He has elite speed. He has really good size. He's almost 6'4". And with some position openings, because of transfers or because of guys graduating, does he play a ton? I don't know, but you can't teach size and you can't teach elite track speed. And those are things that he has, which will give him an opportunity to earn playing time during fall camp. So I think if I had to pick someone in, it would be Sadiq as my first choice, but the wild card I would say would just be Cozart. I'd pick Dickey over Cozart, but Jared already picked him too. So I'm just throwing out Cozart as kind of like that sleeper wild card guy.
Because I don't want an order where I get a pick first again. Why don't you go first on defense, then Jared, then myself, so I can give the wild card? Why don't we do it that way?
Sure. I guess I'll go just the obvious one with Mateo. I didn't want to pick him, but it feels like the most obvious because Oregon has a need of rush edges. DJ Johnson gone. What does the edge look like for Oregon next season? does Mateo work himself onto the defensive line? I don't know. He's got the size for it. Does he start there? But I just think he's the most obvious guy to have a chance at playing right away for Oregon on the defense, just because of his size, his speed, his athleticism. Chris Singletary, one of our analysts for scouting department, views him as a potential future first-round draft pick. And, those types of players, they find ways onto the field pretty quickly.
There's a lot more options, I think, in this side of the ball.
Yes.
But everywhere, I don't know, Oregon's defense at least has a lot of experience at every single position that comes into, I guess, except maybe at linebacker. Yeah. But Oregon didn't really take any linebackers this class. So I'll go with Old Faithful. I'm going with Blake Purchase, another edge rusher. I think he's going to be in steep competition with Mateo Uiagalelei as the guy who comes in as a true freshman and disrupts the pass rusher. I don't think either of them are going to be physically ready to take on a full-time role as a backup in every single game. Maybe Mateo, since he's enrolled early and puts on a couple more pounds of weight. But both of them are extremely talented. Purchase has an unbelievable gap in terms of his top 247 ranking and his composite ranking. I think the top 247 has him as a top 150 player in the country, and the composite has him as like a top 300, top 400 player in the country. But the talent is there. He put up crazy stats. I think he went to Cherry Creek High School in Colorado. Crazy stats there in high school. He's a guy who's a good bit smaller than Mateo is. Someone who I kind of think would be strictly in the game on pass rushing scenarios. So think of like a third down and long. Just trying to get somebody who's quicker and more just faster off the line of scrimmage, quicker to the ball, quicker to the quarterback. Pair him up with Jordan Birch on the other side. I think that's a good idea. As I'm sure Erik might go into, there's a lot of good defensive line picks here that you could probably see making an impact. But I'm going to go with Purchase. I'm just going to stick with Old Faithful there, someone who I've been high on for months now.
Composite Purchase is 282nd. 24/7 Sports 129th. So as you said, big gap. Yeah. There's a lot of options here if we're not using, as we established earlier, I think Mateo is the logical choice. You can also look in the secondary and find some names that would make some sense, at least more highly rated players. I don't know if I see Roger
That was
Pleasant
what I struggled with.
Yeah, I don't know if I see Pleasant or Austin necessarily having a direct path to major playing time, just because I look at the corner room and I think there's a lot of experienced guys back. Jerry Mixon is a name to maybe know at inside linebacker, just because he is the only signee there, and Oregon is rather thin at inside linebacker. But again, a lot of veterans. So if I'm picking do I just pick the guy who I picked in our mock draft that we did a couple of weeks ago, Jared? I guess I probably do. Which is, I guess is probably where it should land, given the way this all played out. So I'll pick Johnny Bowens, who was my selection as well when we did that exercise with Zach Neal a couple weeks ago. I don't know if I necessarily think he's going to be the freshman of the year on defense, because as I said, I think Matt made the right choice there. I probably even like Jared's guy maybe a little better, but there's going to be some guy up front from the defensive line in this class that makes an impact. There are so many, additions that have been made to this cycle. There are quite a few highly regarded returners for Oregon too, and they did add a little bit there. I don't know. We kind of can argue over where Birch fits exactly, but so I don't know if it's he doesn't have a direct path, but as Jared kind of alluded to, and kind of my logic behind why he could be the pick if it's not Mateo is just, hey, this is a kid who comes in. He's going to be here from January on. I think he's already probably over 265, which is what he's listed at based upon photos of that I've seen. He looks massive. And so there's going to be one of these guys who makes an impact, and I'll go with Bowens. All right, on to the final question here, and it's from @the_llama, who does use @the_one_llama. Sorry, there was a numeral in between the L's there. This is going to be a basketball question, and we're going to touch on both programs. It's March Madness time, so any/all of these. 1, what does men's basketball need to do to get in, and what needs to happen for women's basketball to get in? Plus, what are the percentage you think this can happen for either? And then 2, if 1/both get in, what are their seeds, and who could go further? #Autzen Audibles. So kind of a lot to digest there. Let's go to the men because I think there's more to answer than there is on the women's side here because they have games to play, including what will be a conference tournament game on Thursday. The Ducks beat Stanford. They beat Cal since last time we recorded a podcast to earn the 4 seed. That means they get a bye week down in Vegas. Matt will be there to cover it. And you've kind of broken this down on the website, but for those who maybe haven't seen your work, lay it out for us. What do the Ducks need to do to get in?
Getting that 4 seed gives them the bye, as you said. That's the big deal. It's a lot easier to win the tournament playing 3 games in 3 nights instead of 4 games in 4 nights, although Oregon's done both. They have to beat Washington State or Cal. It would be an utter shock if California pulls off the upset, considering they are one of the worst teams in college basketball. But it's March Madness, who knows? But Washington State's going to probably win that one. And so they have to beat Washington State essentially to get to the second round or the quarterfinal round. And Washington State is hot. They have won 6 straight games coming into the Pac12 tournament. One of those is against Oregon. They won by 3 points in the Palouse. That's a game Oregon really felt like they gave away. Oregon kind of handled Washington State the first time that they played back in December. The Cougars were without a couple guys. Washington State is a good 3-point shooting team. Mohamed Gay is a terrific big man. Honestly, it was the matchup I did not want to see. I would have rather have seen Oregon play ASU because ASU is very crazy with the basketball, and you can see them shoot their way in and then shoot their way out of winning games. Washington State's well coached. They've got shooters. They've got an elite big man. It will be a very difficult game. If they get past that one, then they are, I think, squarely on the bubble, and they've got to basically beat UCLA. Beat UCLA, you're probably in. And at that point, you're in the championship game. Just go win the 3rd game, which would more than likely be against Arizona or USC. And that would punch your ticket. But beating UCLA and beating Washington State is probably how you get yourself into the tournament. 2 wins makes it more than likely that you're in. 1 win is going to be dicey. You might get that play-in game. You might get probably left off. They're inside the top 50 for the net rankings, which is good. They have lost a couple of their quad 1 wins that have turned into quad 2s because those teams have lost. So that's hurt their resume a little bit. So beating UCLA is huge. What do you want me to answer? What type of seed line they'd get? Is that the second part of the question?
Let's get to that part later after we do the.
Okay.
I guess it's just maybe tied into the women's part. I was going to ask you what percentage you think it is that they get in, because I think what you're laying out is exactly what I see, obviously, which is that if they get to the conference championship game, I think they're probably in. If they don't, I think it's pretty unlikely. So what are the odds? Yeah,
I would say look, they were in. They had the lead in the second half both times that they played UCLA. UCLA will be without Jalen Clark more than likely. Most likely the Pac-12's Defensive Player of the Year. He hurt himself, was on crutches and a boot in their season finale against UCLA. His status for the tournament, I think he's doubtful right now. So they're going to be limited. They already play a short bench. I think UCLA is a game Oregon can win, but they have to play at their best. This isn't going to be an opponent that you can get away playing a B+ game and win. No, you've got to play one of your best games of the year. So I would say 25% chance that Oregon beats UCLA, that they play 4 or 5 times, they win maybe 1 or 2 of them. And that's the beauty of the tournament. That's the beauty of conference tournaments is some teams, they play a 7-game series, they're going to win, but this is a one-off. And you just need to play really good once. And if Oregon can do that, they can beat anyone in this conference.
Yeah, they've got to play really good twice. They got to play really well against Washington State, assumingly. But I'm with Matt. I would much rather have seen Arizona State, despite the fact that they came into Matthew Knight and blew the doors off of Oregon. Oregon had a really good game in Tempe. That's a team that relies very heavily on isolation basketball, not a lot of ball movement. just individual talent, which sometimes can get by. And if they're making shots, they're one of the hardest teams in the Pac-12 to beat. But the shots that they take are awfully difficult. And sometimes when they make those shots, you just got to tip your cap and say, good shot for you. But that's a much better team for Oregon to face. I will say, though, when Oregon defeated Washington State at home, they went to N'Faly Dante inside a lot. And against Muhammad Gay, who I really like, I think he's going to be somebody who, if he stays another year, could be a dark horse Pac-12 Player of the Year next year. But we'll see if he stays another year. Anyways, Oregon has a tendency to kind of get away from that for whatever reason. When N'Faly Dante is dominating, they will not give him the ball anymore after he messes up once or twice. Let's say he makes a turnover out of a low post, which he's susceptible to doing. They won't go back to him. And this is a game, if they do play Washington State, which I think we all think they will, if they play Washington State, they need to go into N'Faly Dante in the low block and just force them to double or triple team him. And he is more than fine with basketball IQ of making the right pass, getting the ball out of the low block, finding a shooter, finding somebody who can make the extra pass to a shooter, and hopefully they make some shots, because that's what they're going to need to do against Washington State. And if they win that game, absolutely need to do it against UCLA. That UCLA-Arizona game was very fun to watch the other night. That's a very good program in UCLA and Arizona, but UCLA is going to be a tough one. They're without Jalen Clark, but Jaime Jaquez is still there. He's still capable of putting up a lot of points, as we saw in Eugene a couple weeks ago. That's a good program, and like Matt said, 2 wins and it's an auto win. I think you might as well just go win the tournament at that point. It's still going to be difficult for them to get one. I think Washington State's going to play hard. And then after that, like Matt said, you have to play, as good a game as possible against UCLA.
That Washington State loss, Oregon shot a better percentage from the field. They had 9 more rebounds than Washington State did. It was really bad turnovers in the first half and some really untimely offensive rebounds for Washington State in the second half that did them in. Oregon had that game. They should have won. Dana Altman said they were only up 3 at the half, and it should have been 7 or 8, maybe even 10, because of just atrocious turnovers they had in the first half. And Muhammad Gay had 18 points and 12 rebounds. He was really, really good in that one. And to Jared's point, the first time around, he's right. Biddle was dominant in that performance against Washington State. He had, I think, 22 and 7. He did have some turnovers as he struggled with the double teams, but they went to him often, and he was really, really – he's their best player this season. And Dana has said it. When he touches the ball, doesn't have to score. When he touches the ball on the low block, good things tend to happen for the Ducks.
To the women's side, they have played their final regular season game. Their resume is locked in. It's a very bizarre resume. They are 17-14 with the number 19 net ranking. I don't think since the net ranking has come out, which again is not that many years, so it's not a huge sample size, I don't think there's ever been a team quite like this that has basically a 500 record but is top 20 net. Like, you look at some of the teams Oregon is ahead of in the net, and you're like, these are teams that are going to host in the NCAA tournament. These are teams that are 2 or 3 seeds in the NCAA tournament, and Oregon is ahead of them in the net. I think, to the percentage point first, I think it's like a complete coin flip. I think it is 50-50 right now. And the reason I say that is I think Oregon is as on the bubble as any team could be on the bubble. They were inside the field of 68, according to Charlie Prehm, who is the Joe Lunardi equivalent on the women's side. They were the last team in the tournament going into Saturday's games. And then West Virginia upset Baylor on the road in their Big 12 regular season finale game. And now the Mountaineers jumped up a couple of spots and have Oregon as the first team out, with the Mountaineers as the last team in. So it really comes down to Oregon, West Virginia, it feels like right now, according to Charlie Prehm's projections. We don't know if these are entirely accurate or not. I will note that 3 of the next 6 teams after Oregon in the first 4 outfield, Oregon beat multiple times this season. They beat Arkansas heads up. That's the team right behind them. They beat Washington 2 out of 3 times. That team has settled down there. And then they beat Michigan State at the PK 80 or whatever it was, PK 85 event up in Portland earlier this season. So those three teams, they kind of have the tiebreaker against. They do have the tiebreaker against. Of course, there are other things you look at, but I don't expect either of those teams to surpass them. And those teams have all played their final games. What makes this sort of interesting is the Big 12 is, I think, the lone major conference that plays its conference tournament this upcoming week. So Oregon will have to sweat this one out. They want to be big Oklahoma State fans when the Cowboys play West Virginia in the 4-5 game Friday in the Big 12 tournament. So I think if West Virginia loses to Oklahoma State, that probably moves Oregon back in the field. If West Virginia continues to win, that probably hurts Oregon. But again, that's assuming that Charlie Prehm is accurate here to begin with, that Oregon is behind some of the teams that they think they're behind. I think they're a very strange team to look at. There's a lot of reasons to say they should not be in. There are probably more reasons to say they should not be in, to be totally honest. But then you have some reasons that you go, hey, they play in, I think, quite clearly one of the most tough conferences in the country, probably right up there at the top. I think you can argue in terms of depth perspective. They lost 14 games, but 12 out of the 14 are to teams that are in the field, and 10 out of the 14 are to teams that are going to be top 7 seeds. So, they've got an interesting resume. So they are very much in this thing. I think it's going to be a coin flip going up until March 12th, which is this Sunday when they have the selection show in the evening. And if I'm going to put a percentage point to it, I've already kind of done it. I think it's legitimately 50-50 right now for the women.
It is such a strange resume. Never seen anything like it, with a top 20 net team and a 17-14 record. Because more often than not, if you see someone with a 17-14 record, you're not putting them in the tournament. And despite the net ranking that Oregon possesses, I fear that it might just be as simple as that, where the powers that may be of deciding who gets to go into the NCAA tournament will look at Oregon and say, yeah, that's a good net team. They play one of the harder conference schedules in the country. They had a really good out of conference schedule as well against some of the better teams in the country. They're 17-14. I don't know if we can have that in the tournament. And maybe that isn't the case. Maybe West Virginia loses and Oregon gets in because of it. It's really hard.
Can I interject one thing that makes it really interesting in the case between these two schools is Oregon is 17-14 with the number 19 net, and West Virginia is 19-10. So just 2 more wins with a 61st net. So you look at those and go, I don't know. It's really interesting to look at. Clearly, Oregon has a better complete resume and only 2 fewer losses. And 61-19 is a huge margin there. So I'm going to be very curious to see. Sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to add that part because I meant to bring it up on the top.
No.
They have, these two teams have very different kind of paths to getting here, and I'll be very curious to see what the committee thinks is the better resume.
I don't know where they're going to go with this, and that's the problem, and that's what I'm trying to describe here is that the answer is we're only going to just figure it out on Sunday, and there's a pretty good perception of how the men's tournament is going to shake out because there aren't teams like this with a 17-14 record but are top 20 in the net. This is just such a peculiar team that I have no idea how this is going to be figured out, because on one hand, they're one of the better, straight to schedule teams in the entire country, but on the other hand, they're 17-14. They're 3 games above 500. Yeah. They do not look like a conference team or an NCAA tournament team. They finished the regular season losing, I think it was 7 of their final 10 games. Maybe it was 6 of their final 10 because they won their last 2. It's not.
They won their last 3, and they lost 7 or won their last.
Well, I was saying
Stanford. So
yeah, regular season.
Sure.
And that's tough. I mean, that's the time of the year that you absolutely do not want to go through that period of time. I mean, coupled with the 7-game losing streak. So, and I know that was against good competition. It's just the eye test factor. It's going to be tough. Like you said, Eric, I think it's just going to be a 50-50 chance. Like, we're either going to see their name pop up on Sunday or not.
The fact that the women of Oregon, have 0 net 1 wins, quad 1 wins,
doesn't help.
A damning stat. Like, they haven't beaten a single team that's viewed as like a legitimate bona fide NCAA tournament team.
Well, that's not true.
Well,
I mean, they beat Arizona.
They have Arizona at home. Yes, that's right. That's a quad 2 game for them. The women are different rankings, I'm guessing, because I'm looking at their nitty gritty report here. But
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
But the fact remains, like, when you play the elite teams and you don't have a single win, like by that metric, that hurts. And I said this on Twitter with regards to the men, and it applies here for the women too. And unfortunately, it's just a negative aspect of it. At some point, I don't care who you play, you have to win. You have to win games, whether it's a tough schedule or an easy schedule. And I would much rather take a team that's 20-10, and maybe they do have a really weak schedule, but they beat the teams that they could play. And Oregon is 3 games over 500. They don't have any games to play, and they didn't beat anybody in the quad 1 rankings. And so I hope they get in, but I don't know if they should. I mean, it's going to be tough.
Yeah, and I think the other part that is weird and that the net takes it into consideration is just how close all of their losses are. I think all their losses, with the exception of Ohio State, is less than 10, which you get some sort of bump apparently at least on the women, from what I understand, in the net for being close. So, yeah, I don't know. It's going to be weird. They're a very strange team. And then let's get to the second part. If one/both get in, what are their seeds and how far could they go, or who could go farther? Well, I mean, if the women get in, I think if either get in, it's going to be the same thing. They're in the final 4 in the field, so they're going to be a 12 seed playing in the first 4 games. I think that's the path for both. Matt, you can let me know if you disagree. I think if Oregon on the men's side, I guess, could win the conference tournament or get to the conference, do you think they can get? What's the ceiling, I guess, for the men on the seeding perspective?
I mean, if things go perfect and they beat Washington State, UCLA, Arizona, they could probably move to like the 10 seed.
Okay.
Maybe the 9. I don't know. Probably unrealistic there.
They'd be 21. They'd be 21 and 13 with like the number 38 net or something. 35 net, probably, right?
Yeah, you'd be that 10-9 range. I think if they beat Washington State and lose to UCLA close and still get into the tournament, yes, they're in Dayton. They're playing in the play-in round. If they beat UCLA but lose the conference championship, I think they're probably as an 11 seed that's not in the play-in game.
Okay. And then I have no idea who's going to go further because these teams are very similar to me, having watched far too much of them, where I think that the Oregon women, having covered them, can beat a lot of these teams, can be very competitive with a lot of these teams. I spent a lot of time watching Pac-12 conference tournament this weekend, watching other conference tournaments this weekend. I didn't come away thinking like the other conferences were so much better. In fact, like aside from Iowa being really awesome, and I loving watching Caitlin Clark, I really wasn't impressed with much I saw in the Big Ten tournament. South Carolina, like there are teams in these other conferences that are really, really, really good. I'm not saying Oregon would beat the conference champion in the Big 12 or anything like that, or the ACC. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm just saying you watch these conference tournaments and you see a lot of teams that look very much beatable for a team like Oregon that has the upside that we think they have. At the same time, the team also lost 7 straight games. They can lose to just about anybody. And a lot of the teams they lost to are teams that kind of fit into the same resume. So, I mean, sure. Could they win a game? Yeah, I think they could absolutely win a game, especially if they're in that first 4 games that would be played shortly after the selection show. I think those are played on that Wednesday. Absolutely, they could win the game there. And who knows, they could go find a 5 seed that they match up really well with and win that game. I mean, I don't know. But they could have just as easily, if they do make it, and lose their first game to whatever 12 seed they play, and that be it. So, I mean, like,
I think
I don't know how much expectation.
Yeah. I think the men's floor and ceiling is about as wide as it's ever been for a Dana Altman potential tournament team. Like, they hung with Houston, who's like one of the best teams in the country, for like 30 minutes. They almost knocked off Michigan State, who's a tournament team with like 6 scholarship players. They've beaten Arizona. They've hung with UCLA both times. And then they've also lost by 27 points at home to Arizona State. They've also lost at home by, I think, 13 points to UC Irvine. They've lost at home to Utah Valley by 5. Like, Utah Valley is going to win their league, but like that's an embarrassing loss. Like, they could get a 12 seed or an 11 seed and lose by 20, or they could be in the Sweet 16. Like, I don't think that Sweet 16 happens, but like they've shown that they can beat the better teams in college basketball. And this is a year in which there's no real insanely deep field of tournament teams. Parity is very strong and on the men's side this season. So like I think the floor and the ceiling for this team is probably as wide as it's ever been. And you just literally don't know what you're going to get.
Yeah, I don't think I could tell you what team will go farther. I've got no genuine clue, because both teams, like you guys have outlined, yeah, they have the ceiling to do X. They also have the floor to do Y. And could I see either things happening? Yeah. Could I see both teams not making the tournament and we find out whenever Oregon plays presumably Washington State? Yes. Could I presumably see both teams making the tournament and winning their first? Yeah, I can see that too. I just genuinely don't know what's going to happen because it's been such an up and down season for both programs. Erik, we talked about it with the 7-game losing streak. Matt just went through it on who they've been close with and won against over the year and against good basketball programs. I got nothing. I just think this is such a strange season for both teams, and especially for college basketball in general. Like Matt kind of went through for the men's side. I don't have a percentage. I don't have a real thought process of what team could go further because I think it could be either one of them. It's just such a strange season for both teams, and after covering it for both sides, I don't have an actual answer for this, which is kind of surprising because usually I'll just talk out of my butt for having an answer, but I don't have one this time around.
Well, we'll see. We'll find out. We'll know the answers to the field here in about 6 or 7 days. 6 days. It's Monday. We'll have a lot to figure out. We'll have a lot to watch play out, and we'll cover it all on duckterritory.com. But that's going to do it for us today on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for submitting your questions. We'll be back later for more podcasts this week.
Talk later, folks.
Peace.